Part 1. The Vryn scouting fleet moved through the darkness of space with confidence that came from decades of conquest. Commander Zethron stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the star charts with satisfaction. His chitinous plates gleamed under the amber lights as he reviewed the latest reports from his scout teams. They had been traveling through this sector for 3 cycles now and cataloging every primitive world they found. The mission was simple enough. Find developing species and mark their systems for future colonization. The Vryn Empire had built its power on this strategy, and Zethron had personally overseen the subjugation of 12 different civilizations. This latest system looked no different from the others. The third planet showed clear signs of industrial development. Electromagnetic signals bounced through space. Primitive satellites orbited the world. Chemical rockets occasionally launched from the surface. By all measurements, this species had barely left their homeworld. Zethron clicked his mandibles in approval. Species at this level were the easiest to conquer. They had enough technology to be useful as workers, but not enough to mount any real defense. The Vryn Empire would arrive in force within a year, and the inhabitants would have 2 choices. Submit or die. His tactical officer approached with updated sensor data. The officer's voice carried the clipped efficiency that Zethron demanded from his crew. The readings showed exactly what they expected. A single inhabited planet with a few orbital stations, some mining operations on nearby moons, nothing that suggested advanced military capability. Zethron ordered the fleet to advance into the inner system. 16 warships moved forward in formation. Each vessel carried plasma weapons capable of reducing cities to ash. Their shields could withstand most primitive weapons. The fleet represented overwhelming force against any species at this development level. But as they crossed the asteroid belt, something appeared on their sensors that made Zethron's blood freeze in his veins. The signature was massive beyond anything he had encountered in 40 years of military service. At first his mind refused to accept what the sensors reported. The energy output alone dwarfed his entire fleet combined. The mass reading suggested something 3 kilometers long. His sensor officer's voice trembled as he made his report. The object was artificial, and it was moving toward them with deliberate purpose. The vessel had been hiding somehow. Their scouts had completely missed it during their initial survey. Zethron stared at the tactical display and felt fear for the first time in decades. This was not supposed to be possible. Primitive species did not build ships of this magnitude. Yet the evidence filled his screens with undeniable clarity. The human vessel designated UHS Titan emerged from its position near the gas giant and began moving toward the Vryn fleet. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command chair and watched the alien ships with calm focus. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his mind worked quickly through tactical options. Jake had spent 20 years in Earth's defense forces and worked his way up from enlisted ranks to command. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt and dealt with mining disputes in the outer colonies. But this was different. This was first contact with an alien species, and they had come armed into human territory. Lieutenant Amy Richardson monitored her tactical console and reported the alien fleet's composition. 16 vessels arranged in standard attack formation, energy signatures consistent with plasma weapons, shield emitters active across all ships. They were clearly prepared for combat. Jake leaned forward slightly and studied the holographic display. Humanity had wondered for centuries whether they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, and it came in the form of an invasion fleet. The question was how to handle this without starting an interstellar war. He ordered his communications officer to open a channel on all frequencies. Danny Cole worked his console quickly and confirmed the channel was active. Jake took a moment to consider his words. First contact would be remembered forever. History would judge what he said next. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who knew exactly how powerful his ship was. He identified himself in the Titan. He stated clearly that the alien vessels had entered the Sol system without authorization. He demanded they state their intentions. The response was silence. The alien fleet held position, but made no attempt to communicate. Jake could almost feel the calculations happening on their command ship. They had expected an easy conquest and found something entirely different. On the Vryn flagship, Zethron struggled with impossible choices. His entire military career had been built on the doctrine of overwhelming force. The Vryn Empire never retreated, never showed weakness, never negotiated with lesser species, but the massive human ship made a mockery of those doctrines. His tactical officer ran analysis programs and the results came back worse than Zethron feared. The human vessel's hull armor alone was thicker than most Vryn battleships. The shield generators produced energy levels that suggested they could absorb sustained bombardment. The weapon ports visible on the hull numbered in the hundreds. Zethron made his decision. Pride demanded that he respond to the human challenge. The Empire expected its commanders to show strength. He ordered his fleet to power weapons and target the enemy vessel. Perhaps their combined firepower would be enough. The Vryn fleet opened fire in perfect synchronization. Plasma bolts streaked across the void in brilliant streams of superheated matter. 16 ships unleashed their full arsenal at the massive human battleship. The attack would have reduced a standard cruiser to molten debris. The Titan's shields flared as the plasma impacted against them. The bridge crew felt a slight vibration through the deck plates. Nothing more. The defensive systems absorbed the attack with casual efficiency that spoke to years of careful engineering. Amy Richardson checked her tactical displays and reported shield integrity at 98%. The alien weapons had barely scratched their defenses. Jake allowed himself a thin smile. The Titan had been designed for exactly this kind of scenario. Unknown threats. Overwhelming odds. The engineers had built her to survive anything. He decided it was time to send a message that the aliens would understand. Words had failed. Now he would demonstrate what humanity was capable of, but he would do it carefully. He wanted to warn them, not start a massacre. Jake ordered Amy to fire a single round from the primary railgun. He specified the target coordinates precisely. 30 meters off the alien flagship's bow, close enough to be unmistakable but far enough to avoid any possibility of collision. A warning shot that would demonstrate capability without causing casualties. The Titan's railgun hummed as magnetic coils powered up. The weapon accelerated a tungsten slug to a fraction of light speed in less than a second. The projectile shot across the distance between ships and passed exactly where Jake had specified. On the Vryn flagship, alarms screamed as the projectile flashed past their bow. Zethron watched it happen in slow motion according to his enhanced time perception. His tactical systems calculated velocity and mass. The computer provided an impact analysis that made his heart sink. That single round carried enough kinetic energy to split his flagship completely in half. The humans could have destroyed them, but chose not to. This was not a miss. This was a deliberate demonstration of superior firepower combined with precise control. Zethron stared at the human vessel and understood the terrible truth. This was not a primitive species. This was something far more dangerous. These humans had seen his entire fleet and had not even attempted to evade. They had absorbed his best weapons without meaningful damage. Then they had responded with a warning shot that proved they could destroy him whenever they chose. His communication officer waited for orders. His tactical officer watched the sensors. His crew looked to him for leadership. Zethron faced the hardest decision of his career. The Vryn Empire had never retreated from battle. But the Vryn Empire had never encountered anything like the UHS Titan. Part 2 Commander Zethron stood frozen on his bridge as the magnitude of his mistake became crystal clear. His tactical officer waited for orders, but Zethron could barely process what had just happened. The human warning shot had passed close enough to their flagship that their proximity alarms had screamed for 3 full seconds. The kinetic energy calculations still displayed on his console showed a number that made no sense. One projectile carrying more destructive force than his entire opening salvo. He pulled up the tactical analysis of the human vessel again and forced himself to study it with fresh eyes. The ship measured 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull appeared to be layered armor plating thick enough to stop anything in the Vryn arsenal. Weapon emplacements covered every surface in carefully calculated firing arcs. The shield generators produced an energy signature that suggested they could maintain defensive coverage for hours under sustained attack. This was not a warship. This was a mobile fortress designed to survive apocalyptic combat. The humans had built something that existed in a completely different category from standard military vessels. Zethron had conquered 47 civilizations for the Vryn Empire, and he had never encountered anything remotely comparable. His communication officer broke the silence with a question about how to respond. Zethron realized his crew was watching him and waiting for the decisive leadership they expected. But what orders could he give that would not result in their complete destruction? The Vryn military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and swift conquest. They had refined this strategy over decades of expansion. Attack hard and fast, break the enemy's will to resist, offer surrender or death. It had worked perfectly against every species they had encountered, because the Vryn maintained technological superiority. But technological superiority meant nothing when facing a ship like the human battleship. Zethron ran combat simulations in his head, and every scenario ended the same way. Total fleet loss in under 5 minutes. The humans could destroy them all before his ships could even attempt to retreat to jump distance. He made a decision that would likely end his military career. He ordered his weapons officer to power down all offensive systems. The officer hesitated and questioned the order. Zethron repeated it with the full force of command authority behind his words. Slowly and with obvious reluctance, the Vryn fleet began standing down from combat readiness. On the Titan's bridge, Jake Morrison watched the alien ships carefully. The tactical display showed their weapon systems going offline one by one. Amy Richardson reported the change in their status and asked if this might be a trick. Jake considered the possibility but dismissed it. The aliens had just learned they were completely outmatched. This looked like the smart choice rather than a tactical deception. He ordered Danny Cole to open another communication channel. This time Jake chose his words even more carefully. He acknowledged that the aliens had powered down their weapons. He stated that this was a wise decision that would allow both sides to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. He offered them a choice: leave human territory peacefully and this incident would be forgotten. Continue any hostile action and face immediate destruction. Commander Lisa Perry stood beside Jake's command chair and spoke quietly so only he could hear. She questioned whether they should allow the aliens to simply leave. The Vryn fleet had entered their system with obvious hostile intent. Letting them go might be seen as weakness. Jake understood her concern, but he had a different perspective. This was humanity's first contact with intelligent alien life. How they handled these next few minutes would shape their reputation among the stars for generations. If they destroyed the Vryn fleet, it would send one message. If they offered mercy from a position of strength, it would send another. He explained his thinking to Lisa in brief terms. They had demonstrated overwhelming capability. The aliens knew they were outgunned. Destroying them now would accomplish nothing except creating a blood enemy. Letting them retreat would show that humans valued life even when they had every tactical advantage. Lisa considered this and nodded slowly. She acknowledged the wisdom of his approach even though it went against every instinct to eliminate a proven threat. Jake appreciated her trust and returned his attention to the main display. The Vryn flagship finally responded to his communication. Zethron's voice came through the translation software with remarkable clarity. The alien commander identified himself formally and explained his situation. He had been given intelligence reports indicating that the Sol system contained only a primitive species, barely capable of orbital flight. His mission was standard reconnaissance with authorization to claim the system for the Vryn Empire. Jake listened without interrupting. The alien's tone carried no hostility now, just a kind of weary honesty that spoke to a professional military officer, acknowledging a severe miscalculation. Zethron admitted that his information had been completely wrong. He stated plainly that the human vessel was, beyond anything in Vryn experience. The alien commander asked a question that surprised Jake. Zethron wanted to know if humanity had more ships like the Titan. The question revealed strategic thinking even in defeat. The alien was trying to assess whether this single vessel represented humanity's full capability or merely one example of their technology. Jake chose honesty over deception. He confirmed that humanity had additional defensive capabilities throughout the Sol system. He did not specify exact numbers, but he made it clear that the Titan was not alone. He wanted the Vryn to understand that any future attempt at conquest would face organized resistance. Zethron's response came after a long pause. The alien commander stated that he found himself in an unusual position. The Vryn Empire had never retreated from battle. Their entire culture was built on conquest and displays of strength. But wisdom required knowing when a fight could not be won. Jake recognized the dilemma. He had served long enough to understand military honor and the weight of tradition. Zethron was looking for a way to withdraw without appearing cowardly to his superiors. Jake decided to offer him that path. He spoke directly to the alien commander with a tone of respect rather than triumph. He acknowledged that Zethron had operated on faulty intelligence through no fault of his own. He stated that the Vryn commander had shown wisdom by recognizing reality and choosing not to waste lives in an unwinnable engagement. He emphasized that retreat in the face of overwhelming odds was tactical sense, not cowardice. Jake then made his position absolutely clear. The Sol system belonged to humanity and would be defended with all available force, but humanity did not seek conflict with the Vryn Empire. If Zethron withdrew his fleet immediately, then this encounter would be treated as a misunderstanding rather than an act of war. The bridge crew remained silent as they waited for the aliens' response. Amy kept her hand near the weapons console, ready to react instantly if the Vryn chose aggression. Bobby Hayes monitored the alien ship's positions and engine outputs for any sign of attack vectors. Danny listened to all frequencies in case the Vryn were coordinating something on encrypted channels. Zethron's reply came through with what sounded like resignation. He acknowledged Jake's offer and stated that his fleet would withdraw from human territory. He added that the Vryn High Council would be very interested to learn about humanity's existence and capabilities. The comment carried an implicit warning. This encounter was over, but the larger situation remained unresolved. Jake accepted this reality. He had never expected that one encounter would settle everything. First contact was just the beginning of a much longer relationship. Whether that relationship became peaceful or hostile would depend on decisions made by leaders on both sides over the coming months and years. The Vryn fleet began moving away from Earth at sub-light speeds. Their formation remained defensive rather than aggressive. Zethron kept his weapons offline as promised. The 16 alien ships withdrew past the asteroid belt and continued toward the outer system where they could safely engage their faster-than-light drives. Jake maintained combat readiness until the alien vessels cleared the heliopause and vanished from their sensors. Only then did he allow himself to relax slightly. The crisis had passed without bloodshed. Humanity's first contact with intelligent aliens had been hostile, but it had ended with communication rather than annihilation. Lisa Perry observed that they had been lucky. If the aliens had been more aggressive or less rational, the outcome could have been very different. Jake agreed, but pointed out that luck was just preparation meeting opportunity. Humanity had built the Titan specifically to handle unknown threats. When the moment came, they had been ready. Amy Richardson asked what would happen next. Jake stared at the empty space where the Vryn fleet had been and considered the question. The galaxy now knew about humanity. Word would spread. Other species would hear about the massive human battleship that had faced down a Vryn fleet. Some would be curious. Others might be hostile. The Sol system would never be isolated again. He ordered Danny to send a complete report to Earth Command. Every detail of the encounter needed to be documented and analyzed. Humanity needed more ships like the Titan, and they needed them quickly. They also needed protocols for handling first contact situations that... Part 3 weeks after the Vryn fleet retreated from Sol system, Commander Zethron stood in the Grand Council chamber of his homeworld. The crystalline walls caught and refracted light in patterns designed to intimidate those who stood before the 7 members of the High Council. Zethron kept his posture rigid and his voice steady, despite knowing his career hung by a thread. Council Prime Vortex spoke first with a voice that carried across the vast chamber. He stated the facts plainly and without mercy. An entire Vryn fleet had withdrawn from battle against a single enemy vessel. This was unprecedented in the Empire's history. He demanded explanation. Zethron provided his tactical assessment with military precision. The human ship designated Titan measured 3 kilometers in length, with armor plating thicker than a Vryn cruiser. Its shields had absorbed the full barrage from 16 warships without meaningful damage. A single warning shot from the human vessel demonstrated enough kinetic force to destroy his flagship. Combat projections indicated total fleet loss within 5 minutes of engagement. Counselor Thexra interrupted with accusation in her voice. She called his retreat cowardice and stated that the Vryn Empire did not flee from lesser species. She demanded to know why he had not pressed the attack regardless of casualties. Zethron maintained his calm despite the insult. He explained that pressing the attack would have accomplished nothing except the death of every crew member under his command. The humans had demonstrated overwhelming superiority in every measurable category. Sacrifice without purpose was not honor. It was waste. He activated a holographic projection of the Titan and let the council members see for themselves what he had faced. The massive vessel rotated slowly in the air above them. Zethron pointed out the weapon emplacements numbering in the hundreds. He highlighted the shield generators and power systems that dwarfed anything in Vryn technology. He showed them the sensor data from the warning shot. The council chamber fell silent as the 7 members absorbed the information. Counselor Mixra leaned forward from her elevated seat. Her age showed in the weathered texture of her chitinous plates. She asked Zethron to describe the human captain who had commanded the vessel. Zethron found the question unusual, but answered honestly. Captain Jake Morrison had remained calm throughout the encounter. He had demonstrated his vessel's capability without unnecessary aggression. He had offered the Vryn fleet a path to withdraw with dignity and tact, but beneath the diplomatic approach, Zethron had sensed absolute confidence. The human knew exactly how powerful his ship was and felt no need to prove it through excessive violence. Mixra clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. She observed that a species capable of building such weapons but choosing restraint suggested a complex culture. Most aggressive species attacked with full force when they held advantage. The humans had done the opposite. Thexra disagreed sharply. She argued that the humans' mercy showed weakness. The Vryn should have been destroyed as a lesson to others. She insisted that humanity's restraint was vulnerability they could exploit. Vorthek silenced the debate with a gesture. He asked Zethron for his professional recommendation. The commander knew his next words would determine not just his fate, but possibly the Empire's future direction. Zethron stated his belief that the Vryn Empire should establish diplomatic contact with humanity. The humans controlled one system, but their technology suggested rapid expansion capability. Better to have them as neutral neighbors than hostile enemies. He added that conquering humanity would require at least 200 warships based on his tactical analysis. Possibly more. The number shocked the council into silence. The entire Vryn military consisted of approximately 300 vessels spread across 12 systems. Committing 2/3 of their force to conquer a single system was unthinkable. It would leave their existing territory vulnerable and drain resources for years. Vorthek exchanged looks with the other counselors before dismissing Zethron. The commander departed knowing he had given them an impossible choice. Maintain the Empire's doctrine of conquest or acknowledge they had encountered something they could not defeat. On Earth, Jake Morrison faced his own council in a holographic conference room aboard the Titan. Representatives from Earth Command and the Lunar Authority and Mars Colonial Government and Jovian Mining Consortium all wanted detailed reports. Admiral Henry Grant led the discussion with questions about every aspect of the encounter. Jake explained the sequence of events clearly. The Vryn had arrived with hostile intent based on faulty intelligence. They had attacked when challenged. The Titan had demonstrated defensive capability and offensive power. The alien commander had made the rational choice to withdraw rather than face destruction. Governor Claire Hughes from Mars Colony expressed approval of Jake's handling of the situation. She stated that sending the Vryn fleet home defeated but alive sent the right message to the galaxy. Humanity would defend itself but did not seek unnecessary conflict. Director Paul Martinez from Jovian Mining took a different view. He worried that allowing the Vryn to leave showed weakness. Hostile aliens would see humanity as soft. They would keep testing until they found a breaking point. Jake disagreed respectfully. He explained that destroying the Vryn fleet would have created a blood enemy. The Empire would have no choice but to seek revenge. By offering mercy from a position of strength, humanity had demonstrated both capability and judgment. Some species would respect that combination. Admiral Grant asked the critical question, what happened next? Jake had clearly thought about this extensively. He recommended 3 immediate actions. First was accelerating construction of additional Titan-class battleships. 4 more vessels within 5 years would give humanity real defensive depth. Second was establishing a deep space monitoring network to detect future incursions earlier. Third was developing formal first contact protocols that did not rely entirely on military intimidation. The Admiral questioned that last point. Jake explained that the Vryn had backed down because they were outgunned, but humanity would eventually encounter species that were equals or superiors. Military force alone would not be sufficient. They needed diplomatic frameworks and translation protocols and cultural exchange programs. They needed to prepare for conversations as much as combat. Lisa Perry added her support to Jake's recommendations. She noted that the Vryn encounter had been humanity's first test. They had passed through a combination of strong defenses and smart diplomacy. Future encounters would likely be more complex. Admiral Grant announced his decision after brief consultation with the other representatives. Jake would be promoted to Commodore with immediate effect. He would retain command of the Titan, but would also oversee establishment of a new organization called the First Contact Corps. Working with Earth's diplomatic service, he would develop the protocols he had described. Jake accepted the promotion and the responsibility that came with it. He knew the work would be challenging. Creating procedures for something humanity had never done before required careful thought. But it was necessary. The galaxy was larger and more populated than anyone had imagined. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing resource allocation and construction timelines and defensive strategy. When it finally ended, Jake remained in the conference room reviewing his notes. So much had changed in 3 weeks. Humanity had gone from believing they were alone to joining a galaxy full of other civilizations. Amy Richardson appeared at the doorway with a troubled expression. She reported something unusual on their long-range sensors. A probe had been detected beyond the Kuiper Belt. It had been watching them for approximately 2 days. The design was not Vryn. Jake felt anticipation mixed with concern. The Vryn had left, but someone else was watching. He ordered Amy to track the probe carefully but not to engage unless it entered the inner system. He wanted to know who had sent it and what they wanted. He also ordered immediate combat drills for all crew on all shifts. The Titan needed to maintain peak readiness. The encounter with the Vryn had been resolved peacefully, but the galaxy clearly held many more surprises. Amy departed to implement his orders, and Jake sat alone with his thoughts. The probe represented an unknown factor. It might belong to another hostile empire. It might be from a neutral observer. There was no way to know without making contact. He decided to wait and watch. The probe had maintained its distance for 2 days without making any aggressive moves. Whoever controlled it seemed content to observe rather than threaten. That suggested a different approach than the Vryn had taken. Jake pulled up his star charts and studied the vast darkness between systems. Humanity controlled one tiny point in an enormous galaxy. The Vryn Empire controlled 12 systems. How many other civilizations existed out there? How many were hostile and how many might be potential allies? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Jake had spent his entire career preparing for combat, training for threats, learning to defend Earth and its colonies. But now he faced something his training had never covered. How to navigate a galaxy full of unknown civilizations with competing interests and different values. He thought about Commander Zethron and the conversation they had shared. The Vryn officer had impressed him despite being an enemy. Zethron had sheesh. Part 4 of the probe had been manufactured by the Keltheran Assembly 6 months before it arrived in Sol system. Senior analyst Kesserin studied the data streaming from the device with growing fascination. Her scaled hands moved across holographic controls as she reviewed footage of the Titan's encounter with the Vryn fleet for the 18th time. Every viewing revealed new details that impressed her. The human vessel had not attempted evasion when the Vryn attacked. It had simply absorbed the full barrage and measured the effectiveness before responding. That level of confidence suggested extensive testing and absolute certainty in their defensive systems. Her supervisor, Vorlen, approached her workstation with curiosity evident in his posture. He asked what had captured her attention so completely. Kesserin replayed the key moments of the encounter. The Vryn opening fire with plasma weapons, the human shields barely registering damage, the precision warning shot that could have destroyed the alien flagship but deliberately missed. She explained what made this significant. The Keltharan Assembly had been monitoring the Vryn Empire for 70 years. The aggressive species had conquered or subjugated dozens of civilizations. Their standard approach involved overwhelming force followed by demands for submission. Most species either fought and lost or surrendered immediately, but the humans had done neither. They demonstrated superior capability and then offered the Vryn a dignified retreat. That combination was extremely rare. Most powerful species destroyed weaker opponents to establish dominance. The humans had chosen restraint despite having every tactical advantage. Vorlon studied the footage with his crest feathers rising in interest. He asked if Kesrin believed this was strategic thinking or simple mercy. She considered the question carefully before answering. The human captain's communication suggested both. He had been absolutely clear about defending his territory, but he had also recognized that unnecessary violence would create a permanent enemy rather than a cautionary lesson. She pulled up additional data showing humanity's technological development over the past century. The progression was startling. They had gone from primitive chemical rockets to ships like the Titan in less than 70 years. Most species took 300 to 500 years to make equivalent advances. Vorlon asked how this was possible. Kesrin admitted she did not fully understand. But the pattern suggested humanity possessed unusual innovative capacity. They compressed technological evolution through rapid problem-solving and aggressive research programs. Whatever challenges they encountered, they seemed to overcome quickly. She brought up another concern. The Vryn scouts had completely missed humanity's true capabilities. Their initial reports described a primitive species barely capable of orbital flight, yet the Titan existed. Either human technology had advanced extremely rapidly, or they had deliberately hidden their capabilities until necessary. Vorlon found this interesting. Species that could maintain operational security while developing advanced weapons showed sophisticated strategic thinking. He asked for Kesrin's recommendation. She stated clearly that the Keltharan Assembly should make contact, not as invaders but as observers interested in mutual exchange. Her reasoning was straightforward. Humanity had shown both technological capability and tactical wisdom. They had responded to the Vryn threat with measured force rather than excessive violence. Those qualities matched what the Assembly valued in potential member species. Opening dialogue now could lead to beneficial relationships for both civilizations. Vorlon pointed out the risk. If Kesrin was wrong about human intentions, they might be inviting danger. She acknowledged this but countered that their probe could warn them from safe distance. Moreover, the pattern of human behavior suggested they valued communication. The captain had tried talking before shooting. He had offered retreat before destruction. The supervisor approved her recommendation and authorized preparation of a contact message. But first they would wait to see if the humans noticed their probe. That would provide additional data about human sensor capabilities. Aboard the Titan Commodore, Jake Morrison studied the mysterious probe on his tactical display. 4 days of observation had revealed interesting details. The device maintained consistent distance beyond the Kuiper belt. It made no aggressive moves but clearly tracked their position. The design was completely different from Vryn technology. Commander Laura Mitchell reviewed the data with professional curiosity. She had joined the Titan specifically to develop first contact protocols, and this represented her first real opportunity. She noted that the probe's behavior suggested peaceful observation rather than hostile reconnaissance. Amy Richardson offered a different perspective. Any intelligence gathering could be prelude to invasion. Watch and learn weaknesses, then return with appropriate force. She reminded them that caution had kept humanity alive this long. Jake appreciated both viewpoints. Laura's diplomatic optimism balanced Amy's tactical caution. He needed both perspectives to make good decisions. But he leaned toward Laura's interpretation. The probe had been watching for days without hiding. If the operators wanted to remain undetected, they could have maintained greater distance or used stealth technology. Lisa Perry suggested testing their theory. Send a message toward the probe. Make their awareness clear. See how the operators responded. If hostile, they would flee or attack. If peaceful, they might answer. Jake agreed with this approach. He ordered Laura to prepare a first contact package. Keep it simple but comprehensive. Mathematical concepts to establish intelligence. Visual representations to show peaceful intent. Clear statement that humanity was willing to communicate, but remained ready to defend itself. Laura worked quickly to compile the message. She included basic mathematical sequences that any technological civilization would recognize, images showing Earth and human settlements to provide context, audio greetings in multiple Earth languages, and a simple statement encoded in binary. "We see you. We wish to talk. We mean no harm, but we are not helpless." Jake reviewed her work and approved it. The message struck the right balance between openness and strength. He ordered the Titan to move closer to the probe's position, not directly toward it but near enough to demonstrate awareness. Then they transmitted the message on multiple frequencies. At the Keltheran observation post, alarms activated throughout the facility. Kesrin nearly dropped her data tablet in surprise. The humans were hailing them. They had detected the probe and chosen to make contact rather than destroy it or ignore it. She brought up the transmission and analyzed its structure. The message was remarkably well constructed for a first attempt. Mathematical foundations established common reference points. Visual data provided cultural context. The binary statement was direct and honest. They knew the probe existed. They wanted communication. They would defend themselves if necessary but preferred peace. Kesrin called for Vorlin immediately. Her supervisor arrived quickly and reviewed the transmission. He asked if they should respond. She stated emphatically yes. The humans had extended an invitation. Refusing would be insulting. Accepting opened possibilities for mutual benefit. Vorlin authorized a response but kept it limited by the probe's communication capacity. They could send basic data and simple messages, but detailed conversation would require more sophisticated equipment. Kesrin worked to craft an appropriate reply. She matched the human format. Mathematical sequences to confirm understanding. Identification codes for the Keltheran assembly. A brief statement of peaceful observation. And an offer. "We watch in peace. We wish to learn. We mean no threat." The response transmitted back toward the Titan. Kesrin and Vorlin waited to see how the humans would react. This moment could determine whether humanity became an ally or remained an unknown factor in an increasingly complex galaxy. Jake received the alien response with satisfaction. Danny Cole reported that the message followed their format and included what appeared to be organizational identification. Laura worked with translation algorithms to decode the content. The message was simple but encouraging. The probe belonged to something called the Keltheran Assembly. They claimed peaceful observation and expressed interest in learning about humanity. Most importantly, they explicitly stated no hostile intent. Bobby Hayes asked if they could trust the message. Jake considered the question seriously. Trust required verification, but every relationship had to start somewhere. The Keltheran had responded honestly to direct contact. That suggested at minimum they valued communication over deception. He ordered Laura to continue the dialogue. Ask basic questions. Who was the Keltheran Assembly? How many species comprised it? What were their intentions in Sol system? Make clear that humanity welcomed peaceful contact, but required transparency. Over the next several hours, a careful exchange developed. The probe's limited capability restricted conversation to simple concepts, but both sides worked to overcome the limitation. The Keltheran explained they were a coalition of multiple species, 18 civilizations working together across 42 systems. They maintained observation networks to monitor galactic events and identify potential threats or allies. They had been watching humanity for decades but increased attention after the Vryn encounter. The way humans handled that crisis impressed them. They wanted. Part 5. 6 days after the initial contact with the Keltheran probe, a diplomatic vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel near Neptune's orbit. The ship was unlike anything Jake Morrison had seen before. Where the Titan represented raw power through hard angles and heavy armor, the Keltheran vessel spoke of elegance through flowing curves and translucent sections that revealed interior gardens. The propulsion system left barely any detectable emissions. Jake observed from the Titan's bridge as the alien ship approached their designated meeting coordinates. Amy Richardson reported from Tactical that the vessel carried only defensive-grade shields and minimal weapons. The Keltheran had come exactly as promised. One ship designed for diplomacy, not combat. Laura Mitchell stood beside Jake's command chair reviewing her notes one final time. She had spent 6 days studying every scrap of information the Keltheran probe had provided, their language structure and cultural references and diplomatic customs. She felt as prepared as possible for something humanity had never attempted before. Jake asked if she was ready. Laura admitted nervousness but confirmed she could handle the meeting. He told her she would do fine and reminded her that the Keltheran wanted this to work. They had initiated contact. They had agreed to all human security conditions. They were making every effort to appear peaceful. A shuttle departed the Keltheran vessel and headed toward the Titan's docking bay. Jake decided to meet them personally with an honor guard. Laura had suggested this as a sign of respect. Show the aliens that humanity took this meeting seriously. Begin the relationship with proper protocol. The airlock cycled open and the Keltheran delegation entered the Titan. Jake's first impression was surprise at their diversity. The leader, who introduced herself as Ambassador Sileth, was clearly the same species as the probe operator Kesserin. Scaled skin and expressive crest feathers and bipedal stance. But her two companions were completely different species. One resembled an aquatic creature adapted for land. Smooth skin and large intelligent eyes and movements that suggested comfort in water environments. The other had an almost crystalline quality to its body. Light refracted through translucent armor plates in shifting patterns. Sileth spoke through a translation device that converted her language to clear English. She thanked Jake for agreeing to meet and expressed hope for productive dialogue. Her tone carried warmth and genuine interest rather than formality. Jake welcomed them aboard and introduced Laura as humanity's diplomatic officer for first contact. Laura bowed slightly in what she hoped was appropriate Keltheran custom. Sileth returned the gesture with what might have been approval in her body language. Jake led them to a conference room that had been prepared with variable seating to accommodate different physical requirements. He had ordered his crew to think carefully about alien comfort. Small details mattered when building new relationships. Once everyone was seated, Sileth opened the conversation directly. She stated that the assembly had been observing the Vryn encounter closely. The way humanity handled that crisis was why they were here now. Most species either crushed opponents violently or negotiated from weakness. Humans had demonstrated capability and then offered mercy. That combination impressed the assembly leadership. Jake appreciated the directness. He explained that humanity valued life even when facing enemies. Destroying the Vryn fleet would have accomplished nothing except creating permanent hostility. Offering them retreat with dignity preserved options for future relationship. Sileth's crest feathers rose and what Laura had learned indicated interest. The ambassador said this was exactly the kind of thinking the assembly valued. She asked permission to explain what the Keltheran assembly was and why they had sought contact. Laura encouraged her to continue. Sileth described a coalition of 18 species across 42 systems. They had formed 300 years earlier, after devastating wars taught them that cooperation worked better than competition. Each member species maintained sovereignty, but contributed to shared defense and scientific advancement. The aquatic delegate introduced himself as Murrah of the Selkath people. He explained that his homeworld had nearly fallen to raiders before the assembly intervened. The protection and resources provided by the coalition allowed the Selkath to rebuild and eventually thrive. The crystalline being identified itself as Rixen from the Kryn civilization. The Kryn had joined 60 years ago and brought expertise in mineral processing and advanced computing. In return, they gained access to technologies and defensive support they could never have developed alone. Jake listened carefully and asked the obvious question. What did the assembly want from humanity? They controlled one system. They were new to space travel compared to established civilizations. What could they possibly offer such an advanced coalition? Sileth responded with surprising honesty. She explained that the assembly had analyzed the Titan's capabilities thoroughly. The combination of defensive strength and offensive power and tactical mobility was extraordinary. Most species took centuries to develop equivalent technology. Humanity achieved it in decades. That innovative capacity was valuable. The assembly had seen humanity compress technological evolution through rapid problem-solving. They had watched humans overcome challenges that stopped other species for generations. That kind of creative thinking benefited everyone. But more important than technology was judgment. Jake had shown wisdom in handling the Vryn. He could have destroyed them but chose restraint. The assembly needed members who understood when to use force and when to show mercy. Too many civilizations destroyed themselves through unchecked aggression. Laura leaned forward and asked about the, Frin. If humanity developed closer ties with the Assembly that make them targets for revenge. Rickson acknowledged this was valid concern. The Vrin knew about humanity now. Commander Zethron's report had made Earth a known factor in galactic politics. The question was whether humanity faced potential Vrin aggression alone, or with allies who could provide support and information. The Assembly could not guarantee complete safety. No one could in a galaxy full of competing interests, but they could offer partnership and shared resources and diplomatic backing. Murrah added that the Assembly also provided something less tangible, but equally valuable. Knowledge about galactic civilizations and their behaviors, understanding which species could be trusted and which required caution. Information that took centuries to accumulate through experience. Jake considered everything carefully. This was a decision that would shape humanity's future for generations. He asked what the Assembly wanted immediately. What would formal relationship actually involve? Silith outlined a gradual process. First would be exchange of ambassadors. The Assembly requested permission to establish a small embassy station on one of humanity's outer system moons, perhaps one of Saturn's satellites. From there, an ambassador and staff would work with Earth's government to facilitate communication. In return, humanity could send representatives to Assembly space, learn about member species and their cultures, participate in diplomatic forums, share information and perspectives, all without any obligation beyond mutual respect. Laura asked about technology exchange. Silith confirmed this was part of typical Assembly cooperation. They were prepared to share defensive improvements and medical advances and scientific knowledge. Not weapons necessarily, but enhancements that would benefit human civilization. She mentioned specifically that the Assembly had encountered diseases from dozens of species and developed treatments. Some medical innovations might help humanity. Similarly, human research might provide insights useful to Assembly members. This was the foundation of cooperation. Sharing knowledge improved everyone. Jake made his decision. He could not commit humanity without government approval, but he could offer strong recommendation. He asked Silith if they would be willing to meet with Earth's senior leadership. Let them hear this proposal directly. The ambassador agreed immediately. She stated they were prepared to remain in Sol System for up to 2 weeks to facilitate discussions. They understood this was an important decision requiring careful consideration. Over the following days, a remarkable series of meetings unfolded. Earth's political and military leaders came to the Titan to meet the Keltheran delegation. Questions were asked and answered. Concerns were addressed. Possibilities were explored with growing interest. Not everyone embraced the idea enthusiastically. Some officials worried about losing autonomy. Others feared hidden agendas. A few simply distrusted anything alien after the Vrin encounter, but the majority opinion after reviewing all evidence was cautiously positive. On the 8th day, Admiral Henry Grant made the formal announcement. Humanity would establish diplomatic relations with the Keltheran Assembly. An embassy would be constructed on Titan Moon. Human ambassadors would travel to Assembly space. Both civilizations would begin careful process of building mutual understanding. Jake watched the announcement from the Titan's bridge and felt mixture of emotions. Pride that humanity had handled this well, hope for what cooperation might bring, but also concern about unknown challenges ahead. The galaxy was proving far more complex than anyone had imagined. Lisa Perry stood beside him and asked what he was thinking. Jake admitted he wondered what the